In 202 BC, the Second Punic War reaches its final scene on a broad North African plain. Far from the Alps, far from the Italian valleys where Hannibal became a legend, and close enough to Carthage that defeat would be felt in its streets. For more than a decade, Hannibal Barca was the nightmare Rome couldn't wake up from. He crossed mountains, he shattered consular armies, he turned Roman confidence into a stubborn, burning rage. Rome survived by refusing him the decisive battle he wanted, and by fighting the wider war, in Spain, at sea, and through relentless pressure on Carthage's allies. And then came the Roman answer: Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio learned how Carthage fought by breaking their power in Spain, cutting away resources, commanders, and momentum. And when he'd done enough damage there, he did the unthinkable. He carried the war across the sea and landed in Africa. Not to raid, not to posture, but to force Carthage into a corner. Because once Roman troops were burning farmland and threatening the heartland, Carthage faced a choice it had avoided for years. Keep Hannibal in Italy, or bring him home to save the city. So Hannibal left Italy after a campaign that had lasted almost a generation, and returned to Africa to fight a battle he could not postpone. Before Zama, there are moments of diplomacy. Final offers, final refusals. Because both commanders understand what's coming. One last negotiation, and then both armies march out knowing that tomorrow may offer no second chance. Scipio, you've driven this war to our doorstep. You want a final victory. Take it without drowning this plain in blood.
Rome did not cross the sea for words. We came so Carthage can never threaten Italy again.
Then listen, while you still can. Fortune turns like a child at play. If you win, you gain little beyond what you already have. If you lose everything.
I didn't come here to fear chance. I came here with discipline and with men who learned from Cannae.
So this is your answer. No mercy, no terms.
Two choices only. Surrender at Rome's will, or meet me on this field.
Then let the gods judge between us.
They will, at dawn.
The battlefield is a wide open plain, flat enough for mass infantry, wide enough for cavalry to roam. In some reconstructions, the armies camp on opposing heights a few kilometers apart, watching each other from the hills before descending onto open ground at dawn. Hannibal wants ground that helps him, where the plain tightens, where hills and rising ground can limit how freely Roman cavalry swings around his flanks, where confusion in the center can become a trap instead of an escape. Scipio, on the other hand, wants room for cavalry to move, for infantry to maneuver, to absorb Hannibal's opening blow without breaking. The two forces assemble. Scipio brings roughly 30,000 men, with around 6,000 cavalry, the strongest mounted force Rome has fielded against Hannibal. Hannibal brings a larger infantry host, often placed around 40 to 50,000, but with fewer cavalry, roughly 4,000, and he needs his infantry to carry the day. And Hannibal also brings something designed to crack Roman discipline at the start: war elephants. Dozens of them, often given as about 80, lined up at the front like living battering rams. Behind the elephants, Hannibal arranges his infantry in 3 lines. The first line is a mixed front, mercenaries and varied troops, men who will fight hard but are not the core of his army. The second line is heavier, newer levies and African troops, intended to keep the pressure going once the first wave falters. And behind them, held back with a noticeable gap, the Italian veterans. Men who survived Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae, and years of war in hostile territory. Scipio forms his own lines in the Roman way, but he makes one critical adjustment before the battle even begins. He expects elephants, so he does not deploy as one solid, unbroken shield wall. He arranges his maniples so there are clear lanes, corridors running through the Roman formation. It looks strange compared to the classic Roman checkerboard, but it serves a purpose. If elephants charge, the Romans don't have to stop them head-on. They can guide them through the lanes, strike them from the sides, and keep the main infantry body intact.
Men of Carthage, look behind you.
Not to the hills, to your homes, your families, your city. For years we fought on foreign ground and made Rome tremble. At Trebia, at Trasimene, at Cannae. You were the storm that broke their pride. You were the reason they learned fear. And now they've come here thinking Carthage will kneel. They think we are cornered. Good! A cornered lion does not beg. He bites. Let the elephants shake their courage. Let the first lines grind them down. And when the moment opens, when you see their order falter, we strike as one. This field is not just earth and dust. It is the last wall before Carthage. So stand with me. Hold, endure. And if today is our last day, then let it be a day Rome remembers forever. For your blood, for your brothers, for Carthage!
Soldiers of Rome! Today the war ends where it began, with a choice. Either we win on this plain, or we leave our children a world that still fears Carthage. You know the names that scar our history. Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae. Those were not defeats of Roman courage. They were lessons written in blood. And you are the army that learned them. We crossed the sea not for plunder, but for justice. We brought the war to the enemy's doorstep so that Rome would never again fight for its life in its own fields. When the elephants come, do not flinch. Open the lanes, let the beasts pass, then cut them down. Hold your line like iron, because discipline wins battles. Look to your left and right. These men are your shield, and you are theirs. Today we do not fight as separate swords. We fight as one wall. Let Hannibal's veterans come. Let them remember what Rome is. We are not the republic that ran. We are the republic that returned. For Rome. For victory. Forward!
The battle begins with the elephants. Hannibal sends them forward, and the plain erupts into noise. Horns, shouting, missiles, panic. The elephants come on like thunder, but elephants are not machines. They are fear and weight and instinct. Some charge straight into the lanes Scipio prepared, where Roman troops part just enough to let the beasts pass and then hit them with missiles, spears, and controlled pressure. The elephants push through, but they do not shatter the Roman line. Others do something worse for Hannibal. Under stress and pain, some veer toward the flanks, stumbling into cavalry formations, disrupting riders, creating chaos where Hannibal can least afford it. In moments, the elephants become not a weapon, but an accident happening in real time. On one side, Masinissa's Numidian cavalry surges forward. Fast, aggressive, throwing javelins, pressing with constant motion. On the other wing, Roman and allied horse under Scipio's command answers in kind. The cavalry fight turns into pursuit. Riders break, reform, and break again. Dust trails stretching outward as the mounted combat pulls away from the infantry. Farther and farther, until much of the cavalry is temporarily gone from the center. This is crucial. For a time, Zama becomes an infantry battle, exactly where Hannibal believes his veterans can win. With elephants neutralized and cavalry dragged away, the infantry collide. The Roman front line presses into Hannibal's first line. Shield blows, stabbing, pushing, men falling underfoot. Hannibal's first line begins to crack, and when it breaks, it does not retreat cleanly. It spills backward, scattering across the front and slamming into the second line. Men try to push through gaps that aren't there. Officers shout orders that can't be heard. The second line is forced to absorb the chaos of the first, while still facing the Roman advance. For Scipio, this is dangerous too. His anti-elephant lanes saved him from the opening shock, but they also make the early infantry fight less tightly supported than Rome prefers. On the Carthaginian side, the first two lines are bleeding out, and the ground before the veterans is filling with exhausted men, wounded bodies, broken shields, discarded weapons. The battle is already littered with its own history, and Hannibal still hasn't committed the veterans. Scipio begins correcting his formation, shifting units laterally, realigning ranks, tightening the front, until the legion fights like a legion again.
Then the third line steps forward. Hannibal's veterans advance like a final wall,
Organized, disciplined, dangerous. These are not fresh recruits panicking at their first screams. These are men who have lived through Rome's best attempts to kill them for years. Now the battle resets into its most serious form. A long Roman front, reformed, stabilized, meeting Hannibal's veterans head-on. Scipio sees the threat in their shape and length. A flank threat can become a trap. So Scipio makes his most important adjustment of the day. He stretches his infantry into a single extended line, broadening his front, so Hannibal cannot easily fold around him. It's a complicated maneuver on a battlefield already clogged with debris. But Scipio forces the reshaping to happen. When the lines meet, the fighting becomes a grind. Slow, brutal, stubborn. Neither side has room to run. Neither side has a clean advantage. Pressure against pressure. Discipline against discipline. This is the phase where Zama could go either way. And it lasts long enough that men begin to believe the cavalry might never return. Then dust appears again, behind Hannibal. Not Carthaginian dust, Roman and Numidian cavalry returning from pursuit. They re-enter the battlefield at the most decisive angle possible, the rear. The infantry fight is locked in front. Hannibal's veterans are committed, their attention forward, their formation engaged, and suddenly cavalry strikes behind them. Javelins, blades, panic spreading through ranks that cannot easily turn. Now the ground becomes a cage. Hannibal's veterans are pressed from the front by Roman infantry and hit from behind by cavalry. The line buckles. The flanks begin to fold. Escape routes clog with men trying to move through spaces that no longer exist. The battlefield that looked wide at dawn suddenly feels narrow. This is where Zama ends, not as a tidy retreat, but as encirclement turning into mass destruction. Thousands fall, thousands more surrender. Hannibal himself escapes, but his army does not. The losses are catastrophic. Traditional figures give Carthage roughly 20,000 killed and another 20,000 captured. An army shattered in a single day. Roman losses are far smaller, often placed around 1,500, sometimes higher depending on the account, but Rome's victory is decisive. After Zama, Carthage cannot continue the war. The state that once challenged Rome for control of the Western Mediterranean now has no field army capable of stopping invasion. Carthage surrenders on Roman terms, terms that ensure it will never again rise as a rival. Territory lost, enormous payments, limits on military freedom, and a future shaped by Roman permission. Scipio earns the name Africanus, the title of victory stamped onto his identity. Hannibal survives, but now he lives under the shadow of what he couldn't prevent. And Rome steps through the doorway Zama opened, because the Second Punic War does not end with a single battle. It ends with the balance of the Mediterranean snapping in Rome's favor and staying there. Zama wasn't just the defeat of Hannibal. It was the moment Rome stopped fighting to survive and started fighting to rule.